All right, folks, here's the trial again. Witness after witness testified about the horrors of R. Kelly. It has been a damning testimony that we have seen each and every single day in the trial. It appears as if the prosecution is nearing the end of this particular process. Like I say, it has been very traumatic for those who have been testifying. He, of course, is still claiming his innocence, but that's what's going on there. Joining us right now is Dallas attorney Tammy Allison. Tammy, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Roland? Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's break this thing down. It has been more than 2 weeks of testimony, back and forth, back and forth. Your analysis of what we have heard this week.
What we've heard this week is a lot. We heard a lot more evidence from the prosecution's witnesses that speak to that criminal enterprise that you and I talked about the last time that I was on the show, where Mr. Kelly is not being accused of the independent sexual abuses of these alleged victims, but overall a criminal enterprise similar to that of like a mob, and that's that RICO charge. So these testimonies that we've heard, they're stating that Mr. Kelly has done some very horrific things to these alleged victims, that the individuals who worked very closely with Mr. Kelly were aware of what was going on. They testified for the prosecution and detailed some of these very strict rules that Mr. Kelly had for these alleged victims, the fact that they were not able to use the bathroom without permission, they were locked in closets for days. I think we've heard about the naked women crawling out from under the boxing ring and doing sexual things with the very young man, and a lot more. I believe yesterday the prosecution presented evidence from a videotape from 2008 where Mr. Kelly was heard berating one of those alleged victims, and it was a very traumatic testimony that was heard yesterday. And I think that the jury, they're hearing all of this, and I'm not sure how the defense is going to be able to overcome it. Because of COVID in the federal courtroom, cameras are not allowed, and the reporters are not able to see the jurors or their reactions to this testimony because of the fact that they are in these overflow rooms. So there's just like a lot of speculation as to how the jury is receiving this information.
But here's the question: is berating someone actually illegal?
I don't think so. But the thing is, Roland, is that that type of testimony that these federal prosecutors are trying to elicit from these witnesses, again, it goes towards that larger criminal enterprise, trying to say that Mr. Kelly used his power, his influence, his fame in order to keep not only these alleged victims under his control, but also those individuals that worked with him. So, you know, berating someone and another individual that's witnessing that, they're going to be less likely to like speak back against that. So I believe that the prosecution is strategically bringing that up to show how much Mr. Kelly had power and control over everyone.
Okay, but if we're thinking about this from a gang standpoint, we're thinking about this in terms of RICO statutes, how we dealt with the mob. Well, they arrested underlings and the mob bosses. In this case, it's only him. So what about, okay, all the people who work for him, nobody else has been charged, except for, I guess, the dude who gave a bribe for some information. But so it's sort of like, okay, there's a criminal enterprise, but of one.
Exactly. And you know what, Roland? There's been some witnesses, I'm sorry, not the witnesses, but some of the Mr. Robert Sylvester Kelly super fans that are at the courthouse day in and day out. And there's been a lot of footage that's played of these super fans talking about that very issue. And I was on another network where I stated, you know, these super fans, they're making some very good points now, because these types of charges, the criminal enterprise, RICO, where it's akin to like a mob boss, it's typically not used in this manner. So for us to really dive in and see that Mr. Kelly is the only one here that is facing these charges for a whole criminal enterprise, which allows the door to be open for a lot of evidence and testimony to be let in, because the statute of limitations allows it to go back further than if he were being charged for any one of these individual acts. I think it's very interesting that you point that out, but his super fans have definitely been on top of that.
Question or comment for Tammy? I'll start with you, Reese.
Yes, a lot of the comments that I hear, why is R. Kelly the only one that is facing the charges? I mean, I think he's the one who is obviously the most egregiously guilty on here. Do you make anything of it, or can you explain to those who are to those viewers why the absence of charges for other people does not mean that R. Kelly is any less allegedly guilty? Let me put it that way.
Yes, thank you for that question. So this case is before a federal district court judge. So these are United States attorneys that have brought these charges forward and indicted Mr. Kelly. Now, these prosecutors believe that they have enough evidence for him that they can move forward and present evidence so that the jury could find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the standard of proof in any criminal trial. Now, if the defense is able to raise doubt, then Mr. Kelly can be found not guilty. Federal prosecutors tend not to bring charges against individuals if they feel that they are not going to be able to meet that burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So if there's any type of doubt that the prosecutors feel that it's already going to be raised, they're going to be less likely to go ahead and bring an indictment against that individual because it's not going to result in a guilty verdict.
Dr. Turner.
Yeah, just as a physician, I'm always curious as it relates to health and specifically my passion for mental health. So when you see things that's happened to people like, Simone and other athletes who have talked about, a history of being abused or issues with coaches and different things and people that they have held in high regards, I'm just curious about the process and what may be going on mentally as we watch the witnesses give testimonies from things that may have happened 10, 15, 20 years ago that mentally they suppress. And suppression and denial is a defense mechanism that allows people to continue to, live how they live without having to worry about those uncomfortable feelings. That's why we're seeing people that are still now about COVID. So I'm just curious about, are you all able to, gauge, what may be emotional, mental challenging times as relates to the witnesses as they're giving testimonies?
I think that's an excellent question and something that, I've talked about on other networks as well, given the fact that these are predominantly young African-American women. And this is, again, pre-Me Too movement, where people have been comfortable coming forward with allegations of sexual assault and abuse. So given the fact that these alleged victims were minors at the time of these alleged incidents that Mr. Kelly allegedly has done, I think it is very important that we take into consideration not only the mental health status of each one of the individuals, but the timing. And was it okay back then to speak out against someone who has so much power, control, influence, money, and fame, and what that would do to not only that individual and their family? I always talk about myself because I'm an open book. I'm a survivor myself, and there is a lot of trauma that's affiliated with being a victim of abuse. So I think that the defense attorney, the way that he's cross-examining some of these witnesses, really trying to attack their character and to paint them out to be not credible witnesses to the jury. His main focus is trying to categorize these individuals as groupies. I do not believe that that's the proper type of defense, given the fact that I do think the jury is going to be taking into consideration the mental health aspects that you mentioned and the various traumas that these individuals have gone through. And a lot of survivors, including myself, we don't speak out as soon as it happens.
Right.
There's a lot of time and effort and energy where you have to work through that before you get comfortable. So we've heard throughout the trial the defense attorneys asking some of these alleged victims, well, did you call the police? Well, you went to a civil attorney, you had a monetary settlement. But again, it's like back in the early 90s, early 2000s, even up until this Me Too movement, a lot of these alleged victims probably felt more comfortable settling this that way and having monetary compensation for what they've been through, as opposed to the backlash that they and their families might have received if they went to law enforcement authorities.
Dr. Carr?
Thank you, Roland. And thank you, Sister Allison, Attorney Allison. I was reading an article today that spoke to, I guess, a discovery in one of R. Kelly's storage bins of letters that he probably forced these girls to write, saying that they hadn't done anything, and they detail in great deal I'll detail all the things they didn't do. I guess what I want to ask you as an attorney, and realizing that that standard, of course, is kind of high, and the federal prosecutors are throwing everything against Kelly, and he's going to probably do everything he can to besmirch the witnesses. As you're observing this jury, and we know that a lot of jury trials are about jury selection in the process, can you help us understand why it might not be as big a slam dunk as we imagine it should be based on the evidence that's being admitted in the testimony? I mean, what's your sense of the jury and the possibility that it, some of them may say, I'm just going to they're persecuting R. Kelly, in other words, the same thing we've seen before. Do you have a sense of that at this stage?
I mean, it depends, but that's a very good point that you make. Right now, because of how the courtroom is set up in federal district court, the jury is not in the jury box where they traditionally would be, where people could observe them. Even the person that sketches out the pictures of the courtroom is having a difficult time making out who the jury is, if certain witnesses have glasses on or don't have glasses on, because they're in these overflow rooms watching the trial on a monitor as opposed to being inside of the courtroom. So the jury is spread out pursuant to the COVID protocols. So no one is really able to see the reaction of the jury members to see if they're reacting in disgust, if they're looking like they're interested, if they look like they're sleepy or bored with some of this testimony. So only time can tell. And as it pertains to some of those letters that Mr. Kelly allegedly had these alleged victims write, the prosecution has presented them to show the jury that Mr. Kelly had that intent. He knew what he was doing was illegal, and he pretty much coerced these individuals to write these letters to exonerate him if, in fact, he were to ever face charges. So the prosecution is actually using those letters, where you would think that the defense attorneys would use the letters to be like, okay, look, they wrote a letter, he didn't do it. But no, the prosecution is using it to go ahead and establish that criminal enterprise mindset of that control that he had, using his fame, his power, his money, the attention that he had, to show that how he was able to convince these young women and men to write letters to say that he didn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
All right, then. Attorney Tammy Allison, we surely appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
All right, have a good one.